All right, here we are at the top of the hour. Well, 1 minute past. It was close, I guess. So I noticed that it was all fun and games, Travis, for the webinar until I noticed that my mother logged in. So I better be on my best behavior for sure. And so,
Trying to be serious.
yeah, that's right. Thanks for joining, Mom. We know somebody loves me out there. So, but thanks everybody for joining us. And so today we've got a decent topic in mind here: building a healthy company culture. And so we've been working on kind of our summer series. Well, before summer actually started, of learning and development. This is I think our fourth or fifth installment in the series, perhaps. We've spent some time talking about a few other things as well. Those that have joined us again, thank you for doing so. Those of you that are on here for the first time, we appreciate you as well. And so hopefully you'll come back as well. And again, today's topic is building a healthy company culture, something that is very necessary for sure. But before we get into that, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. The first is the webinar is being recorded, so if you've got to dip out before we finish, never fear, it'll be recorded. And so if you hear something again, you can come back to that. If you think that someone else would benefit from our webinar, we'd love for you to share. If you need the link to past recordings, we can also provide that as well. Everyone is in listen-only mode, so if you're like me and you did not fix your hair, I think you're going to be okay. No one will see it. Totally fine. Go ahead and eat that late lunch and cough away. We're all going to be just fine. And the last thing is, towards when we get to the end, the last thing we'll do is we'll have a kind of a Q&A session for anything that came in while we were talking. So if you've got a question, just drop that in the Q&A there, and we'll be able to see that. If we don't get to everybody's question, we'll certainly answer it one-on-one. So, but let's get into it. Again, my name is Brian Reeve. I'm the Employee Benefits Advisor. I am an Employee Benefits Advisor here at Upstream. I'm joined with my co-host, Mr. Travis Van Dusen, or I like to affectionately call him Mr. T. Say hi, Mr. T.
What's up, everybody?
Travis has been helping companies for a while now. He's been helping companies and leaders, actually, and we're grateful that he calls Upstream home. He provides a lot of value to our clients in leadership, and we like to say at Upstream, when the leader gets better, everyone gets better, or rather, as the leader gets better, we see that tide rise, and tide rises, raises all boats. So very important for us for learning and development, or L&D as we've shortened it. Or maybe I didn't shorten it. Maybe I learned that along the way somewhere. But the benefits of learning and development is our series that we've got going on this summer. Attraction and retention, improving financial performance, conflict resolution, and training future leaders. And we've touched on those categories over the last several months. So again, if there's something that strikes your fancy there, we've surely got a video for it or a podcast. And so I'll show you our podcast towards the end of the thing as well. Well, maybe that was a shameless plug. I don't know, as Travis likes to say. But nonetheless, and so if you like my voice and want to hear more of it, then you go to the podcast. Or if you like Travis, then you certainly go to the podcast. But today we're focused in on culture, company culture to be exact. You know, culture is one of these things that I think that we've kind of come to understand is a very key area in learning and development. And if you're not crafting a good, solid, healthy culture, then the employees will craft that culture for you. And it may not be the one that you want crafted if perhaps you're allowing them to craft it versus yourself. And so the number one reason we see companies fail in this area is because there's not a leader leading in the area of culture, of trying to develop that healthy company culture. It takes intentional work and time. This is not a microwave meal, so if you're looking to hit 30 seconds and out comes something that's going to be great, that's not what we're after here, and that's not what's going to take place. This looks more like kind of your grandma's crock pot meal. It's going to take time, intentionality, and patience. And so when we talk about crafting a healthy culture, we're focused on foundational ideas, and that's really kind of what we're after today, our aim is to talk about some of these foundational pieces that make up a healthy culture, or critical components, as we like to say. And so a culture is where we have staff that looks more like family than strangers. It's where trust and patience with each other exist. So let's begin there, Mr. T. What the heck is culture?
Yeah, before we get started, I was just thinking, you talk about a crock pot. What we really, this whole webinar has been kind of birthed out of is really what we call the 10 ingredients of a healthy company culture. And we can't give you all of them today, but we're going to give you 4 of them. So first thing I will say about culture is this: every place has a culture. Even an elevator has a culture. If you think about it, when you get into an elevator, most of them have some sort of music playing. It's the same music that seems to have existed since the beginning of time, kind of music. And, it has an ambiance that you're used to. The way you get onto the elevator is part of the culture. The way everybody stands and, is not making eye contact is part of the culture. The way everybody gets off the elevator is part of the culture. It doesn't matter what place it is, it has a culture. Your house has a culture. Your business has a culture. And the most basic definition of culture is this: it's how we do things here. How we do things here. And I'll tell you this: your organizational culture is more important than your purpose statement, your mission statement, your goals, because your culture is going to trump everything else that goes on in your organization. You can spend all your time on all those other things, and those are good, positive things. But if your culture is not right, none of the other things are going to follow along and help you be successful. I like to give the example of we all like to go to a steakhouse now and then, and I know I do. And I want you to imagine that you ordered a steak, and you've been excited for the steak potentially for weeks, right? You finally get into that restaurant, you sit down, and they finally put that steak down for you, and you look at it, and the steak looks amazing. I mean, you're ready to dig in, but you have one problem: the plate is dirty. You see, we want that nice steak, but the plate is dirty. So let me ask you a question: you going to eat that steak, Brian? You going to eat that steak if the plate's dirty?
Maybe. If it's Capital Grille, probably. Your house, probably not.
Yeah, exactly. Chances are, I know from my perspective, I'm not going to eat on that plate. So the reality is, no matter how good that steak looks, that plate sets it up and devalues the whole situation. And I'll say that's the same thing when we talk about our culture. See, the culture is the plate, and the steak is all those things like your company, the company, location, the finances, the business plan, all those fancy things that we like to put around it. All those things don't matter if the culture is not set correctly. If the plate is dirty, you're not going to eat. And no one wants to deal with an unhealthy organization. No one wants what you have if it's not a healthy organization. And many leaders confuse culture with vision and strategy. Those are not the same things. Culture is where vision and strategy go to die. I like to say that culture, eats everything else for breakfast. It eats all those things. You have no control over that if you don't have control over your culture. For many of us, we talk about company values that create this culture. I've worked with organizations, and this is kind of a phrase that I've coined is, we have companies that have a culture, and then there is the culture. There's the culture and the culture. And let me kind of give you a little bit of understanding here. The culture, the first culture, is the one that we put on the walls. We put in the brochures. We put it in the training manuals, and we talk about how much we value each team member. But then there's a culture that exists outside of those brochures and off the walls, and it's what's actually existing within the organization. And putting it on the walls and putting it into the pamphlets and putting it into the training is not enough if it doesn't exist in reality. I mean, we hear these great, companies that come up with these great value systems. Let me give you an example. Maybe you've heard, respect. We're going to treat others as they would like to, as we want to be treated ourselves. Integrity, maintaining the highest ethical standards, so that everybody's doing the same thing. We want to have high integrity, communication, being open, honest, and actively listening. Excellence. We want to strive to be the best in everything we do and continually improving. Man, those things sound so great. And I'm sure they look wonderful on a wall. But do you know whose values those were at one point? It was Enron. And if you know anything about Enron, and we'll talk a little bit about it more in a minute, they were marked with some of the biggest fraud cases and ethical breaches ever. They created so many new problems for the business world and for the financial world that we're still living with today. So culture is not something written on the walls. It's something that actually exists within your organization. One thing I'll say before I pass it back to you, Brian, is a toxic culture is like carbon monoxide. You can't see it or smell it, but it will kill you. And it seems that's the way it works.
Yeah, moving from the wall to actually in place is difficult, right? We kind of live in a day and age where talking about it is kind of where things stop, right? But we're really judged on our actions. And I think one of the shortfalls that we see within this failure to kind of move from the wall to the workplace or build that healthy culture is really that lack of leadership that I mentioned. And we get to this place where this effect of an unhealthy culture is pervasive. It just kind of expands well beyond the borders of our own company. And Enron is a perfect example of that. I had a chance to talk to my wife earlier, who's a financial planner, and we were talking about some of the industry changes that has taken place over the years because of the lack of culture in some of these places, like in Enron. And we talked about things like heavy government regulation, which can be a good thing that comes in when we have a situation like Enron, but regardless of good or not, implementation is another step of that regulation. And then that regulation requires a huge financial burden. And so we could see smaller companies not being able to move up to the task. A simple example may be where you're now required to do certain things or buy certain equipment to kind of upfit to get to that regulation, and you may not be able to do that as a company. So regulations can be good, but the implementation is what falls on the back end, and it affects all of us. We see a consolidation that takes place. One of the things after the Affordable Care Act was passed many years ago was a consolidation in our agency level, right? We started seeing all of these agencies and agents combining and consolidating. Well, as the big companies kind of grew larger and larger and larger, the agents were given the direction of don't go talk to the small companies. There's just not enough meat on the bone or profit margin to be able to entertain these smaller companies. We need to stick with the larger companies. Well, so all of these things as a result of kind of that unhealthy culture really unhinges itself in these other areas. So it's pretty pervasive for sure. Probably the most tragic item we see is really in an unhealthy culture is a lack of trust. And I think that's where we're going next, Travis.
Yeah, so the first one we're really going to talk about is ambiguity versus transparency. Open and honest communication. The number one, the biggest challenge leaders face today is that trust is not given immediately like it used to be. Brian, 10 years ago, it used to be more of the policy that I will trust you till you give me a reason not to trust you. And we wish we were there, but we're not there anymore. The reality is most of us are not going to give people the benefit of the doubt anymore. So when it comes to trust, it has to be earned very quickly more than having that grace period in the beginning with a new leader or with a new employee coming on. Everything is suspect moving forward. There's something called Elderman's Trust Barometer, and he says more than half of the population will not trust until they've seen evidence of trust or proof of trust. So we have to ask the question, how do we build trust? And, I've seen it so many different ways. Some people believe, let's have a pizza party. And the pizza party is going to build the trust. We're going to buy some pizza and we're going to have this nice party. Or some people go even further and they go, to a camp or something and they do the trust fall, right? All right, we're going to all do the trust fall. We're going to catch this person. And the reality is none of these things are really what we're talking about when it comes to trust. And one of the things that I have noticed as I've started working more specifically with small business owners who have full ownership of their businesses is they have this temptation to want to hoard information and to play it very close to the vest. And I understand that because it's your personal business and you have no responsibilities to shareholders or anything. You know, you don't owe that to the people necessarily in some ways. But I'll say this: when communication decreases, uncertainty increases, and that's what we want to avoid. You know, too often we're unwilling to share things out of the hope that it's going to somehow make things better. But it's better to actually disappoint people on your team than it is to lie to them. You know, it's that idea that we want to make sure that we are communicating and building trust with our people by being as transparent as we possibly can. You know, some people, most people will not commit themselves to the team quite simply because they don't really feel like they have been let inside on the team. They feel like they're an outsider to the team. And when we play this information as power game, what happens is we leave people on the outside and they feel like they're on the outside, and these people will never give you their whole heart. They'll never give you their highest effort because the reality is they just don't feel valued at that level. So when we have full transparency, when we tell the truth immediately, when we let our employees know that, hey, you need to level up in these areas, you need to get better and grow in these areas, this is actually something that they can hold on to. They can feel like they're valued as part of the team instead of trying to push them out and to protect information. The reality is, for all of you guys as business owners, as you live in a glass house, everybody's watching everything you do. You know, I've got 3 children, so I can literally walk out of this room and I'm literally going to have 3 sets of eyes watching me everywhere I go. And the reality is, for you as a business owner, they're watching you. They're seeing what you're doing. They're seeing how transparent you are. And the reality is, it's not about your feelings as much as it is about being a great professional. And professionalism starts with having great transparency. Because when you have that trust, you have a currency that you can exchange at times when things get hard, or maybe you find a situation where you can't share information. Maybe it is something that you can't let everybody know, but you have a bank account that you've built up with trust with your people. But too often we try to get to those moments where we need to maybe make a little bit of a withdrawal of our trust to say, people, just trust me. Just trust me. I can't really share what's going on right now, but you can trust me because I have some influence. I have some money in the account. But too often what ends up happening is we actually overdraw the account. And once the account is overdrawn, it's almost impossible to get that trust back. It takes years to get that back and to work into those things. So when we talk about trust, we're talking about being able to have that transparency that builds that trust. And guess what happens when we have trust? When we have trust, we can move rapidly. But when trust is violated, we move slowly. The perfect example of this came out of a book called The Speed of Trust, and they talk about 9/11. Any of you had ever flown on an airplane before 9/11? You could literally walk up to the gate of the door of the airplane, within a few hundred feet, and you could jump on an airplane in 10, 15 minutes. Now you're showing up to the airport, an hour, 2 hours. If you're my parents, you're showing up 6 hours in advance for their flight. Why? Because now there's TSA. Now there's all these regulated procedures that you have to go through to board an aircraft. You see, trust was violated. So now it takes longer to get through. Now there's a barrier called TSA that you have to cross to get over to the other side, to get through to board an aircraft. And it's the same way with our trust with our team. We can move fast if we have trust within our team. We can move quickly and we can get things done faster. But at the same time, if you violated trust, and you've bankrupted yourself, and you have nothing for them to lean on, that ultimately your things will move a lot slower. The reality is, when you have transparency, your team will grow closer, problems get solved faster, and trust grows stronger. So that's really our challenge here. Is in that first one, the first ingredient is just work on your transparency and your trust.
Yeah, when we saw COVID was kind of the great equalizer in many ways, but one of the things that we witnessed were companies quickly shut down, sent employees home, and a lot of those employees had no idea what was next, right? Well, I don't know if my job's going to be there, and what about my benefits while I'm at home, and is the company even going to be there when I return, or will there even be a return? Are we going to work from home? And so we saw all this kind of ambiguity amongst the employees, and then that could have even bred into sadder situations where those companies didn't return because the culture just couldn't really sustain that shock of what COVID brought. And so when we talk about crafting a culture, we're focused on those foundational ideas that make people excited about coming to work, right? A culture where people feel secure and led well, a culture that breeds trust and patience with each other, and it gives you that sustainability when those ups and downs occur, right? When the marketplace really begins to change and we see turmoil or things hit your business that are specific to your business, make you stumble a little bit. As Travis says, it kind of gives you that currency to be able to move forward without, kind of coming unhinged from a work perspective. And we also see a much more loyal workforce as a result of that transparency. So another critical ingredient to healthy culture is continuous learning. And so this one's kind of a tough one for some folks, Travis.
Yeah, I mean, continuous learning is a struggle for a lot of companies because there is a call to investment. That there's not just a call of a financial investment, but also a time investment. And for a lot of small businesses, time is something that they don't have a lot of. They don't want to give up because we're running small teams. In a lot of cases, you're doing potentially a lot of volume. But I would say this is something it's not worth sacrificing it. It's not worth pushing past it. And too often we do, because as leaders, we should always be learners, and we should always be encouraging our people to learn. I was talking to an organization, not that long ago, and they were kind of, I don't want to spend the money. Well, what if I spend the money and they leave? And it just reminds me of that, that old John Maxwell quote that says, okay, you don't want to spend the money. What if you don't train them well? What if you don't help them grow and they leave you? If they grow and they leave, great. But the bigger question is, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? So the reality is, at this point, you don't have a responsibility of worrying whether they're going to come or go. It's more about the investment into making sure you're pouring into them, because if you're pouring into your people, they're not going to want to leave. The capacity to learn is a gift. It's the ability to learn a skill, but the willingness to learn is the choice. For all of us, as soon as we left high school or we left college, that was when the learning stopped. We never picked up another book. We never went to another course. We never went to another conference. We stopped growing, and we're adults. We don't need that anymore. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that we can make. So just really quick, here's a couple thoughts on, how do we want to grow? Just basic practicality, quick things that we can think about. And number one is we want to create an intentional process. And that's one of the things that we at Upstream can help you do, is create an intentional process for, number one, developing yourself, and then secondly to that, developing others, developing the rest of your team. The second thing is we need to value the process. The process is where we value the process of growing. Too often we look at these. I mean, one of the things that I spent 10 years in aviation, and as a senior leader, one of the things we struggled with the most was training was looked at, and growth opportunities were looked at so much as a check the box item, that there was not much emphasis put on the experience of the growth. So value the process. If you don't value the process, you don't really value the victory of getting to the next, to growing and getting better. The next way is don't shy away from the losses. As you're growing, you're going to fail. You're going to make mistakes. Failure is just as important as success. Moving through those things. There's a cycle of success that I like to teach, and I can't really teach it right now, but I'll share it with you real quick. It's simple. We test. We do this at Upstream a lot. We're doing it right now with this webinar. We test. We fail. We learn. We adjust. We re-enter. We test, we fail, we learn, adjust, re-enter. That's a circle. It's a process that we're constantly going through. And that's what growth looks like in action. We're testing it, we're failing, we're learning, we're adjusting, we're re-entering. And that's the idea behind this idea of growth, is that we have to be willing to be open to the idea of investment into your people, but also allowing them to try things and fail and grow. And I guarantee you, if you have that mentality in your organization, you're going to succeed ultimately. I mean, me and Brian have shared stories for days about how Upstream was started and all the failures that had to happen before that he finally started seeing success. So investing into those things, the truth is I can go deeper on this subject, but this is something I would love to take a sidebar on with any of you that would want to talk about it. But continuous learning is an important piece or an important ingredient of a healthy culture.
Yeah, it's a continuous thing. It's intentionally you going to grow. Many years ago, I kind of thought I arrived and I was done learning. I kind of learned everything I need to learn to be an employee benefits advisor or small business advisor. Then a few days passed and I realized, I still have lots more to learn. And so you never really stop. It's a continuous thing. Look at AI now. I'm sure you've heard AI like probably 3 times before this webinar or even seen it. It's in everything. And so what's it going to do? What's it going to change? How do we leverage it at Upstream to our benefit? How do we use it to be better at what we're doing? You're probably going through the same thing. It's a huge learning curve. I've even heard folks talk about, maybe I'm going to lose my job because of this. Well, maybe something you ought to think about, and continuous learning is part of that thinking process. Maybe you're not a big fan of change. I'm not always a big fan of change. I do it, but it's more so because everyone around me is constantly growing, constantly changing, and the environment is constantly changing. So whether I like it or not, things are moving forward. And if I get off the train, it's continuing to go down the tracks, and I may miss opportunities. And so as leaders, we should make our learning and growth intentional. And as we do that, others watching us will do the same way. This builds a healthy company culture. And so our third one, key ingredient here is adaptability.
Yeah, one thing I want to add on the growth one, on the learning real quick, is that, for a lot of you may be hitting barriers, or you may have someone on your team who, has done really well for you, but seems to have hit a wall, and maybe they've been promoted. And I've seen this in my own life where I've promoted people within an organization, and they eventually reach a point to where, they were such a great employee, and then a year later you're having to let them go due to failure. They weren't able to do their job, they weren't performing well, whatever it may be. Almost every case is because their growth has been stunted beyond their promotions. See, when you promote, you have to grow right beside it. And if you, as a business owner, if you want to get better, you want to grow as a leader, that for your business to grow, you have to grow right beside it. And that's that continuous learning mentality. Is too often when you overextend is when your growth and where you are in your career or wherever it may be, one of them has been overextended. So just keep that in mind as you're moving forward, is that those need to move together if we're going to be successful. So we're going into that inflexibility and adaptability. The only constant in this world is everything is constantly changing. Adaptability is the power to adjust, evolve, or thrive in a changing world. And as small business owners, we have to be willing to be the ones who are are always being willing to adjust. And as business owners, great business owners, they see before and they see more than everybody else sees. And that ability to see more and before everyone else is what makes you great as a leader and as a small business owner. And for you to be able to see more and before, that also means you need to be adjusting and making those proper adjustments and adapting to those situations. I had a conversation a few days ago with a friend of mine who owns a small business, and he was talking about how he's fighting the usage of AI. And there's just a lot of things in his business that I said, I think it'd be useful for. He's like, no, I'm not going to use it. And I told him, I said, well, then you're going to be irrelevant. Your unwillingness to adapt to these new things that are coming out, these new things that are expediting other people who are in your industry, is going to make you irrelevant or put you way behind when it's time to finally move forward. Even in the insurance industry, as I've joined upstream and just learning, the laws are always changing. The policies, the procedures, how this is done, how all these things are done are constantly moving. And so there's an adaptability needed. There's new mechanisms that need to be inputted. We can't be anchored in the past. Too many business leaders have had successes that they're continuing to look backwards and point to. And you can do that for a short time and probably be okay, but ultimately continuing to look back at previous successes is ultimately going to leave you in a position where you're not going to be where you need to be, and you're not going to be making the adjustments that you need to be successful. As a small business owner, your goal is to get people from A to B, from here to there. That's the goal, right? But the reality is that that B, it's always moving. It's always moving. There's always that need for some sort of adaptability. And the companies that understand that, they understand that this is what is needed, and that they're looking into the future. They're listening to the people who are, kind of on the edge of what's going on in your industry. Those are going to be the people who succeed. But too often we get too rigid in our policies and our procedures, and we're unwilling to look at things, and we lose that adaptability, and that is where we begin to fail.
It's one of those things I was thinking about when I first got into insurance 12, 13 years ago, somewhere around in there. I was in a massive room. There was one of the well-known medical carriers in our area was having a conference, and I'm sitting there. I think I've been licensed for like 3 weeks, and there's an older lady beside me, and she had been in the industry for quite some time, and she could kind of see my newness. Maybe it was my sharpened number 2 pencil. I don't know. This was way back. But anyway, she said, "Just getting in?" And I said, "Yeah." And she was like, "I think I'm going to get out. This Affordable Care Act is going to be kind of the death of us agents, and things are going to really change, and none of us are going to have a job in a year from now." Well, clearly she wasn't willing to adapt and kind of move with what was coming down the pike. And so the Affordable Care Act was a huge change for our industry for sure. And so it required lots and lots of adaptability. And so COVID also put us to the test as well. Moving from an in-person environment to a virtual, I could probably count on one hand how many virtual meetings I had conducted prior to COVID. And now we may do 3 to 10 a day, depending on what we've got going on. Moving from that kind of paper-oriented place to completely digital, because now I can't even hand you a paper because it'll kill you. And so we had to move to that digital space. And I'm still getting on the phone. I was on the phone just yesterday with a new client that we've got coming on board. And his big frustration was every time that he had to fax the applications for the employees over would sometimes not go through. And so he asked me if my fax machine was okay. And I said, "It is okay. I don't have a fax machine, but I'm sure if I did, it would be okay." And so we're growing and changing, and things we have to adapt to kind of keep up. There was a little bit of a case study that I had a chance to do as we were building our slides here, talking about culture. I had a chance to talk to a small church, a small local church in our area, and my big question was to them was, how did you have to adapt going into COVID? And the very first thing that the pastor told me was, we had already kind of adapted a month before COVID hit. They decided that they wanted to be more mainstream and kind of get a stream online for maybe shut-ins or folks that couldn't make their services. So they just put a cell phone up and started recording the service. Audio and video was terrible, but boom, now they're online. And then, of course, as COVID hit, they didn't have to do anything extra. They actually started enhancing what they were doing because they had already adapted prior to that. And they used the time where when they sent the members home, they used that time where the building was vacant to begin fixing it up and adding value, changing the carpets, putting new things on the walls, painting, a fresh coat of paint, things of that nature. They also made a point to connect with their members that were at home. So they literally the leaders literally got in their cars and began driving around to connect with and deliver gifts and shirts and things like that to the members, just to say, hey, we're thinking about you even though we're not meeting in person. And the last thing that the pastor told me is that their membership actually grew during that time where they weren't meeting in person. And I was blown away by that because of their adaptability. They were able to position themselves in a place where COVID stunk for them, but it wasn't a deal breaker. And we've seen some local churches close their doors because of COVID and a lack of membership and folks attending. So that little small case study was really interesting to me to see how adaptability allowed this church to kind of be on the forefront and weather that storm. And so the last point that I think we've got to talk about here is recognition. I will be honest with you, I struggle sometimes with this, but I'll let Travis tell me how to do it best.
The great thing about recognition, Brian, is it doesn't cost you anything. And I think that's the one surprise that I have with some business owners is they don't use it when it doesn't cost anything other than investing the time to recognize positive things and to give that recognition. There's some statistics out there that says team members who feel they receive great recognition are 20 times more likely to be engaged than someone who is not getting that positive recognition. And team members who feel that they're getting the right amount of recognition are 31% less likely to burn out. If you are in the HR world or if you're in the business world, you're hearing a lot about that word right now as burnout. People are reaching a point to where they feel like they literally cannot go any further. But the reality is the deepest craving of any human is to be accepted, to be appreciated. And a lot of times, there's a lot of studies out there that actually say that being appreciated actually matters to most people more than money, more than benefits, more than anything else. And the reality is, a business owner, congratulations, you have a tool right in your hand, right in front of you that you can use today that is free. It's just the investment of your time and your effort to go and recognize those people. There's a few things to keep in mind when you're giving recognition. It's make sure it's timely, make sure it's appropriate, be authentic. One of the things I often tell business owners and leaders is make sure you're very specific in your praise, because the next week when you come back and say, hey, man, when you have to come back later on and give feedback that's negative, there's a lot of confusion often because one day you're praising them and the next day you're giving them critical feedback. And you're like, well, yesterday you said I was doing a good job. Now you're saying I'm not doing a good job. So let's be very specific in the praise and very specific in our critical feedback. So making sure that those things are happening. Keeping in mind that some people may appreciate being recognized in public, while others may feel that it is more appropriate to be done privately. I always say if you can give that recognition in front of their family or somehow let their family know that this is part of the process, it's also a valuable piece to the puzzle. To the puzzle. Feeling gratitude and not expressing it is like wrapping a present and not giving it. I love that quote. But that's the reality is we should all feel gratitude towards the people who we call our team members. And simply by giving that recognition is giving them a gift that's very valuable.
I think that's where I come up short is I often think about it, but I don't move from thinking about it to speaking it, right? That's my failure. And so what I've tried to do is to immediately when I think about it, it comes out, whether it's a text or an email or a thought. And it's not perfect, but it's my little process of trying to get it out. And if you're thinking, well, man, you know what? I'm not going to recognize them. I mean, they're getting paid to do their job. That is very true. They are getting paid to do their job, but they can go somewhere else and get paid to do a job as well. And so I think just a simple recognition of things they're doing well, giving them that small little boost goes a long way with your collateral. And that's really what we're talking about is kind of building up that credit kind of in that account so you can use it perhaps when you really need it. And so, but if your praise is unauthentic or very sparingly and you move to that kind of we need to tell you something that you're doing wrong, that's what the employees are going to only hear is that time that you hammered them. They're not going to remember that time that you told them well, right? And then that's going to be kind of on a feedback loop inside their head. So praise, recognition must be authentic and often.
Oh, yeah.
Culture is something that's built and maintained. And so, well, let's recap. We're kind of getting towards the end here, so let's recap some of the things we talked about. So a healthy company culture has some key ingredients, 4 that we talked about today. That first healthy company culture ingredient is transparency and trust. Trust allows companies' employees to grow closer, solve problems faster, and survive those big problems when they come. Continuous learning, it's something that we have to be intentional. We have to make growth a priority, and others will do that as well when they witness you doing it. And so remember, if taking the time to grow an employee's knowledge is too costly, what happens if you don't develop them and they stay, as Travis mentioned? And so adaptability, remember my example of the small church and how they adapted kind of as they were moving through COVID, and it actually worked out really well for them because they were able to adapt with the nature of the beast there. And then lastly, recognition, what we just finished talking about, recognizing and appreciating your employees authentically. Everyone loves to be appreciated for sure. And so with that, kind of our next steps, and then we'll move to Q&A here as we wrap ourselves up. And so look at that, 1:44, we're doing great with time. And so kind of next steps. So maybe you heard something today that you want to learn a little bit more about. That's totally fine. So the next step's really kind of connecting with us. We don't have kind of just a boilerplate item where we just drop you in and you kind of move forward with a healthy culture. Everything that happens on the learning on the learning and development side is completely custom. And it doesn't mean that it's $1 billion. It just means that it's custom to your organization. Maybe some of the challenges that you have are unique to just your industry or your people. And the best place to kind of start that conversation is, well, with a conversation. And give us a call. Shoot us an email. Travis would love to chat with you. And maybe you just need some answers. Maybe you just need to brainstorm something. And we're totally fine with that as well. We don't mind getting on the phone and helping. And so that's really kind of the next step. If you get a chance, check out our Small Business Reflections podcast, because a lot of the things that we talked about on the webinar there or today appear over there, and some of the other pieces to that learning and development that we've been talking about. And so with that, let's kind of look at our Q&A. So let me get over here to that Q&A button. One of these days I'm going to figure out how all this works. So a couple questions, Travis, or more than a couple actually. The first one is, what if you are building a healthy culture, but an employee is being toxic?
That's a good question, and I guarantee if you're building a healthy culture, you're gonna face that at some point. First thing I would go back to and just say is the number one point we talked about is transparency. When you are shifting a culture, when you're making those massive moves, realize that you're gonna face some opposition. Not everybody, just like most of us, we don't enjoy change. So expect, there's going to be challenges, but those challenges have to be met with setting an expectation. So what I mean by that is simple. That transparency is letting them know, hey, this attitude, this mentality, this worth ethic, or whatever the issue may be, is not going to be allowed. And then you set expectations and you hold to them. One of the things about transparency is people know where they stand, and that is a huge, huge component for me when I'm talking to leaders and business owners, is that the people need to know where they stand with the organization. Too often I'm having conversations with leaders that are, I need to terminate this employee, I need to let him go. And my first question is, well, how many conversations have you had with him? How many coaching sessions have you had with him? Well, we really haven't talked to him about it, but I've had it up to here. I'm ready to go. And I tell them, I'm like, is that your failure or their failure? And the reality is, it's your failure more than it is theirs, because you haven't made them aware. So if you're walking someone out the door, then honestly, they should already know this is coming. If it's a blindside situation, then you haven't done your job. So I'd say transparency followed up with accountability is going to be the key piece there.
Yeah, we've learned this firsthand a time or two, and I see a couple folks on the webinar that I know deal with this on a regular basis. And so I would say be honest with them, help them if you can, but move on if necessary. And so because you're building a healthy culture, and one employee can really hamper that. So you have to kind of make that decision, is this going to be a deal breaker or not for this particular person if they can't jump on board. Next question, Travis, could you briefly mention a few other healthy company culture indicators? I think you had mentioned that we're doing 4, but there were a handful more. So what are a couple other ones that you could mention?
Yeah, I can't give you all the magic, but I can give you maybe a few of the other ones that are important. One of the ones we love to talk about is empowerment. A healthy culture empowers the people on their team. They understand that number one, they can't do it all, and that they have the responsibility to empowering other people on the team to make decisions and to lead and to grow and to help others on the team. So that empowerment is probably one of the biggest pieces of relieving stress for small business owners, is just helping others make decisions for themselves and to do things on their own. And it's a huge piece of trust in an organization. Another one, accountability. I don't think that one needs to really be explained anymore. Holding people accountable. There's nothing worse than not holding a poor performing employee accountable while your high performers have to suffer, and they have to kind of watch as things get worse and worse around them. If you want to keep your good people, you have to make sure you're holding your poor performers accountable, and your people who cause issues within your company. And then finally, just respect, a mutual respect between the business owner, business leaders, and also between each other. There should just be a mutual respect that exists within the organization. And I say that, but a lot of times, man, Brian, I'll tell you that one right there can oftentimes be a struggle as well. There's just not a mutual respect.
Yeah, we have to be careful. We have the benefit of seeing kind of into companies' cultures across many different companies, all the way from a construction company to a funeral home. So we have a quite a diverse mix, and each one of those entities has their own culture. And so we've kind of seen some of these things firsthand go well and some of these things not go so well. And so I was thinking about accountability, and strangely enough, that's one of the ones that has kind of pitted employees against each other. Well, Steve got away with it. Well, what about Brian? And so we all turn into 10-year-olds in a moment. And so last question that I've got here, and we can sign off, is what is the one thing I can do today to begin the journey to a healthy company culture?
Yeah, I mean, like you said at the beginning of this, Brian, this is a crock pot method. And the reality is, as you're changing a culture of a company, it's really not advisable to do more than one thing at a time. Because when you begin to overwhelm people when you start changing expectations and changing procedures and changing kind of the way things are done, whether that's the way we communicate or the way discipline is handled within a company. And I would say start with the most easiest one on this list, the cheapest one, the free one, is just begin to show appreciation and recognition to your employees and to your team. If you've never done that before, I'm going to tell you right now, it's going to be, it may actually come off the first couple of times as unauthentic or unsincere. But after a while, when people begin to realize that it's true gratitude and thankfulness, it really matters. It really matters, and it's free. So that would be the one I would say start with, is just begin recognizing your team.
Yeah, and be patient. Be patient with your team. Be patient with yourself, because if recognition, like for me, it doesn't always come natural. It's something that I have to work into. So I'm trying to be patient with myself to kind of get that on board. And as Travis says, sometimes maybe if I recognize someone, it does sound kind of unauthentic because based on my past, I haven't overly recognized folks. So there's a bit of a learning curve to kind of work yourself into that culture. Or perhaps maybe understanding who your employees are may be a great first step as well. We've talked about DISC assessments, and I know some of you have done DISC assessments as well. But I would just say if you did that DISC assessment and everybody high-fived and then you put it in the drawer and walked away, perhaps maybe you should dust it out, read it again, or maybe take it again, because that's something that I go back continually. I'm constantly pulling that assessment out going, okay, what do I need to be saying and how I need to be saying it here to this particular person to make sure that I'm getting it correctly. Or putting it in a place where it's better received or well received for them. So with that, I don't think there's any other questions on the docket here, Travis. And so
awesome.
I really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much. We'll be back at it again next month. And I cannot remember what next month is. This is me being transparent. I think it has something to do with renewals. And
it
so,
does.
Yeah. Miss Dana Pellick will be with us, or with Travis, rather. Maybe I'll be on vacation, I don't know, but talk about renewals. And so there's lots that we do around employee benefit renewals each year, and I think some folks have requested that information, so we're just going to kind of cover some high-level stuff there. With that, Travis, anything before I sign off, sir?
No, I mean, I think this is just want to encourage you to just stay the course, one thing at a time each day. Just try to improve one area, and that's the way this is done. It's not. There's no one fell swoop. There's no one lever, as you like to say, Brian, to pull that's going to fix all these problems. But it starts with today. It starts with today, and that's what we can control. So, make today an opportunity to improve the culture of your organization.
Awesome. I appreciate everybody. We're always grateful to see our clients on here. If you've got any questions or concerns, please reach out to us. Let us know what you thought, and we appreciate you. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.